Hello, everyone. I hope you're all doing great. Thank you so much for joining us today. Today's a special day because not because we have the great debate in France in 2 hours about French presidential elections, but because we have an amazing webinar with Lubomira Rochet live from London. Hello, Lubomira.
Hello everyone. Super happy to be with you today.
Thank you so much. Lubomira, we've known you for years with Isolis, and it's always been a dream to invite you to one of our webinars. So here we are. We're all so lucky to have you with us. Welcome, Lubo. And as always, I have a couple of housekeeping information for our ever-growing audience. So please ask your questions in the chat, and we will try to answer them at the end of this live session. Today, I will have the honor to co-present this session with Anya Champsor, digital marketing expert based in New York, and Lucy May Eschbach, based in London. Hello, Lucy May. Hello, Anya.
Hello. Hi,
Hi everyone.
So, Lubomira, I have the honor to quickly present you. But in fact, I really don't know where to start. You're an extraordinary mix of influences from Bulgaria to Berkeley, political science in Bruges, and a lot of so many things, in fact. And for us at Numbly, you are also, of course, a magic blend of tech, marketing, business strategy, and above all, an incredible energy, an incredible open-mindedness and capacity to listen, to understand, and to act so fast. Something maybe like the Lubo Touch. This weekend, my kids took me to attend a great exhibition in Paris. I strongly recommend everyone to visit Foundation Louis Vuitton on Virgil Abloh, the famous street fashion designer, who unfortunately passed away a few months ago. And Virgil Abloh celebrated creativity, maybe more than anything, maybe more than art. And he describes creativity as the sum of imagination, work, and urgency. This made me think of you, Lubo. And maybe my icebreaker question would be digital transformation, which you embodied so well at L'Oréal Group in the past 7 years before moving recently to JAB Partners, is maybe, in fact, not so far from an art rather than a science. What do you think, Lubo?
Well, it's an interesting question because especially in 2014, when we started the adventure, there was no playbook. There was no playbook for what a CDO was supposed to be, what he was supposed or she was supposed to do, and so in fact we had to invent pretty much everything. So I think, and to answer your question more precisely, I would say it's both, because at the end of the day, there is a science of it, which it's about KPIs and strategy and numbers and stuff and programs and but it's also about understanding the organization you're operating into, being able to onboard people, being able to present them with the opportunities and create the desire for them to transform and to actually move forward. So I think I would say it's both.
Thank you. That's perfect. Thank you so much. And maybe now we will quickly explain the rules of the game that we imagined for today. And it is to actually navigate through different topics. Because as I said, you have so many possible topics we want to discuss with you. So unfortunately, I'm afraid we won't be able to do all of them, but we will try to, of course. And in order to be sure that we address the priority topics for our great audience today and for you, Lubomira, it's supposed to be nice for you as well, by the way. And well, we will choose the topics. So maybe, Lubomira, you can choose the first one among those 8 ones, and then we will let our audience vote in the chat and choose the next topics that they would love to listen you about. So the 8 topics that we would like to cover today. possibly, are obviously leading digital transformation. You already touched on this. Navigating structural digital trends. What else, of course, to talk about with you? Ecom is a key part of what you did, obviously, at L'Oréal. First-party data, because everyone talks about first-party data. So is it always the good ultimate solution? Data collaboration, another hot topic at the moment. Gamification, because we can't avoid the topic, and we have Anya with us, who's an expert, but I don't want to influence your choice, of course. We will talk potentially about power dynamic and big tech. And last but maybe not least, targeting versus reach. So Lubomira, my first question, which one would you like to start with?
But that's a hard one, to be honest. I think I love the first-party data. I love the e-commerce. I love the data collaboration. I love the power dynamic and big tech. But maybe if we start from leading digital transformation, it's also cool because it contains a lot of those things too. So maybe we can start by that.
Let's go for it. That sounds perfect. Thank you. So, talking about leading digital transformation, we have this funny, or I don't know if it's that funny, but that tells a lot about the typical questions that people face nowadays about digital transformation. It's a top priority. Everyone agrees on that. But if we start with what we mean by this term, well, some people are late for another meeting at that point. So maybe our first question, Lucy May.
Yeah. So I mean, again, I think this is really an honor for us to be able to ask you those questions, Lubomira. And like it's an honor working with you within digital transformation jobs. I'm going to start with a really what's going to sound like a really easy question, but is obviously not that easy. When we talk about digital transformation, what does it really mean for you exactly?
Well, actually, it's a good question because I remember being faced with exactly that same question when, I arrived on March 31st at L'Oréal and I had my first meeting with the then CEO Jean-Paul Agon, and I asked him, so what am I supposed to do now? And he said, well, it's for you to tell me. So I was like, okay, good. But it was amazing. That's very L'Oréal in a way. It's a very entrepreneurial culture. I think, if we take a step back, number one thing I would say is it depends on your industry. That's very true across the board. And then if you take a step back, and now I'm taking a step back because after having worked at an agency before L'Oréal and then L'Oréal, which I had a very strong sectorial focus, and now I again oversees many different sectors. I would say that at the end of the day, for me, it's about three things. Number one, and not necessarily in that order, and it depends. But number one is reinventing the customer experience and everything around customer engagement. And that's, spans a lot of things, from the way you do marketing, from the way you sell, from the way you create experiences powered by technology or digital technology, so that you create services and stuff. So I think that's one big bucket of it, and it's really a way of translating what we used to do in a more modern way, which is digital. The second thing is about operational efficiency. It's really, and this is where really the whole data and AI conversation is really key. It's really about creating operational efficiency in the back office, which is often a part that is not talked about a lot, but which is completely essential. I happen to be sitting also at the board of Société Générale, which is a bank. And in Société Générale, that's really a key part of the digital transformation. It's reimagining processes, it's reimagining compliance with new tools such as data and AI, and that's really key. So reinventing customer experience, operational efficiency, but it's also about creating new revenue streams or new business models. And this is where I think a lot of companies have been innovating around their boundaries, their traditional boundaries, to create new services, to incorporate new services into their platforms. And this is where you can create additional business models. So I would say at the end of the day, for me, it's really about those three big things. And depending on your sector, you will choose to put the weight more on 1 or 2 or 3. And in L'Oréal, it was a lot about number 1, which is reinventing the customer experience. When I was there, now it's of course continuing to evolve under the leadership of Asmita Dubey, who's now taking the lead and leading the charge. But again, depending on the sectors.
Very clear, thank you. We have 2 other questions, of course, in this section. You've kind of touched upon them, but maybe what would you say, those are the 3 kind of categories for digital transformations. Are there any key ingredients that you would mention that really will impact having a successful digital transformation? If you want to pick a sector, we have the same question then for L'Oréal's digital transformation. So if you can maybe take us through exactly how you managed to make such a successful digital transformation.
I think, a digital transformation is a transformation to start with. And so it's every time a business is confronted with changing, it's always the same ingredients at the end of the day. Number 1 is to make sure that you understand the impact of that transformation on your business. ESG is a great, it's a great transformation that is happening right now. So, and it's the same mindset. So number 1, understand what that thing that is supposed to transform your business is doing to your business. So if you think of L'Oréal, I mean, start from first principles. The number 1 thing is it creates new channels to sell your products, right? So 2014, L'Oréal was doing 2% of its sales in e-commerce. And clearly that was clearly a trend that would not stop. That was there for many reasons, from convenience to experience, and we knew that e-commerce would capture a bigger part of our consumers' wallets. So that's the first thing is accelerate on e-commerce. Number 2 is with the apparition of new platforms where prescription or influence was happening, such as the YouTube, the Instagram, the Facebook, the Pinterest, the TikToks of the world. You really had to shift the way you were doing marketing. And when you're a company like L'Oréal or any FMCG, spending a lot of money into marketing, you really have to embrace that change and make sure that you're remaining relevant and fishing where fish are and where people are actually spending their time, so that your brands are discoverable. So discoverability is a big one. And number 3 is, what is amazing is that in every transformation, you have risks, for sure, but you also have amazing opportunities. And one of the top priority we've spotted at the time in 2014, which seems very obvious today, was the fact that we could build a knowledge of our customers through data that was completely not there. All the data was in our channels. And so that's how we created the strategy that remained the same for 7 years, which was around accelerating e-commerce and reaching 20% of our sales by 2020. It was about reinventing the marketing model of the company from advertising and TV advertising into always on digital marketing. And it was around creating value through data and essentially first-party data and getting data on our customers.
Right, thanks. I think this is really key insights that you're giving us. Yeah. I think, the last question was really on L'Oréal, but you've really touched upon that. I don't know if there's one last kind of secret that you want to share when it comes to the transformation you did at L'Oréal, and fine if you don't, and otherwise we can probably skip to the next section with other questions.
I think that, many people still confuse digital transformation with the tech transformation. And a lot of the conversations I'm still hearing, like 10 years in, are still around, should we choose Salesforce or LiveRamp or and I'm like, that's so much not the point. Fine, it's super important to have the right set of tools and the right set of technologies. But the number 1 thing is starting from the strategic angle. And again, back to first principles, what is really what you want to achieve. There's no digital strategy. There's a strategy, there's a company strategy into which digital has to provide, edge or moat or value creation. And so starting with the strategy, then taking the time to embark the business, because in every transformation, as always, you will have 20% of people who are super excited. Well, 15% of people who are super excited because they are excited about new things. You have 65% of people who are like, I don't give a shit. And you have 15% of people who are like, over my dead body, right? So you really have to work with those three groups of people, and to make sure that you create the desire. You create the desire, you create the impetus, you create the appetite, you create the envy of people to follow, I mean, you and this new thing that is coming. And then I would say that it's very soft skills what I'm talking about, but I think it's super important, back to the art and science thing. Agenda setting is key, because you can have a great strategy that nobody understands. Like, you have the 250-page deck from any consultant, put the name here, and that nobody understands that. You have to have a strategy that is so simple, so actionable, that you can put words in people's mouth when they are at dinner with their wives or their mothers and say, well, actually, I'm working in digital transformation. This is what I'm doing. And so, you know, making it simple, memorable, and create this agenda setting is absolutely key. And of course, having KPIs and objectives that you follow through seems to me the most important thing. Have a strategy, embark the business, agenda setting, be there every time you have an important meeting. You have to have digital on it, and KPIs.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Lubomira. So we understood that the 200 slides decks are not your favorite,
No.
or maybe not in the beginning. So we have some important news to share, because people have been voting like crazy in this webinar. So there's no doubt still that number 2 question that people would love you to hear you about is first-party data focus. So I think we will jump to that section right now.
Cool. Let's go.
Yes.
And I think this is going to be me again. I think we just wanted to share an example first. So, of course, when we talk about first-party data, one thing that we talk about is services, and especially at L'Oréal, but I'm sure it's the same in other companies you're working with today. We're talking about services. We see them every time, all day. It's a huge focus. To be able to collect that kind of data in order to be able to enrich the content that's being pushed to consumers. It's not just a question of pushing personalized content, but it's a question of enriching the relationship with them, the conversation with them, the experience with them. We've got an example here of L'Oréal acquiring Modiface, but there are many other examples that we see on a daily basis. And I think what makes it really, really interesting when you're talking about services in the case of first-party data collection is it's kind of the first time that people are giving you information because they want something in return. And by definition, they're going to get something in return. They're giving you data to be able to, for you to give them advice, recommendations, a personalized product or service, which I think makes it really, really interesting in today's first-party data focus and ecosystem.
Yeah, thank you so much, Lucime. I really think that this example of what you did with the acquisition of Modiface really brings a lot to the conversation on first-party data acquisition. Because again, so many companies are a bit lost in the dark when it comes to acquiring first-party data. We have all those polls about value exchange, what drives consumers data sharing, as if consumers would have the same willingness for each brand, which is probably not the case. So on average, in this chart here from Cheetah Digital, we see that maybe people like coupons most, and then loyalty points and rewards, at least in the US. But in fact, it all depends on the brands, and I think the way you change the rules of the game with those services and was really exceptional at L'Oréal. So one question we had, Lubomira, was really about non-love brands, maybe, or maybe you could start with telling us a bit about the value of Modiface, and then answer this and the story of Modiface, and then answer this question about other brands which may not always be love brands.
I think, well, it's less a question of love brands than frequency, but I'll come back to that. I think no, the Modiface story is one of my favorite venture bubbles, and I have so much, passion and enthusiasm with what the guys are building right now with the digital service factory at L'Oréal. And the thing is, we started to talk about cookieless world in 2017, I think. So we kind of were overseeing where the world was going because of privacy looming in, because of the platforms being so much under pressure and scrutiny. So we kind of started to see it coming, a future of cookieless world. And in L'Oréal, we have to remember that out of the 1 billion, and I don't even remember now, 1.2 or 3 billion data points we had, like a big majority was cookies. Was cookies and was anonymous data. It was not logged in, it was not identified. And so we knew that the world was changing and that we needed to do something about it. And so this is where the whole services strategy started to shape. Modiface is an amazing example of that, but there are other examples that we got through, especially partnership with startups that the teams were also leading in terms of connecting with the ecosystem of startups, with the VCs, with the incubators of that world. And it was really about how can we never forget that the data is not ours, that the data is the consumers to start with. And so that we will need to provide something valuable enough for them to be willing to let the data go and share with us. And so this is how we started thinking about what does it mean value creation or value exchange in beauty. And that was amazing because we had mapped the consumer journey, and we were like, okay, there's things around try on, there is thing around diagnostics, there is thing around reassurance or advice. There are things around easing the customer journey through booking or sampling, or of course convenience and couponing. So we had a clear map of everything that could be considered as a service on top of our great products that we were selling. And I think this is how the journey started. And then, of course, within that, we saw that augmented reality was a big thing. And we were kind of like visionary without knowing it, because when COVID hit, all the stores were closed, and we were so happy to have Modiface rolled out everywhere in our stores, or sometimes even in retailer platforms, partners. And so augmented reality was a big thing, and we could see all the value of that. And so that's how we decided to partner with Modiface and to finally acquire Modiface. But it really started from, we are soon gonna be living in the cookieless world. First party will be completely essential. And the more we can go into an identified first party with real and valuable and qualified information around our consumers, the better it would be. And to segue into your question around the non-love brands, I think at the end of the day, it is less about love brand, but about frequency. Because if you think about it, what is hard is to create value when people come and see you very little, or maybe they buy your product 1 or 2 times per year. See, if they buy your product 1 or 2 times per year, how can you create this meaningful ongoing relationship? How can you create a meaningful loyalty program? How can you create reasons for them to come back and back and back? And so, again, for me, it's less a love run thing than a frequency question. And so that's part 1 of my answer. Part 2 is, when you are a non-love brand and a low frequency category, this is where you accumulate a bit the thing, then first party data is not always the answer. I've seen that one of the buckets, like in the choices we have, is data collaboration. I think data collaboration makes a ton of sense. And if the costs or even frankly the capacity for you to build your first party data is not there, it's not because everybody else is talking about first party data and that L'Oréal acquired Modiface that in your business it makes sense. So how can you envision a world where through partnerships and meaningful partnerships, you can create value and have access to data? And I'm not saying buying, database on the market. I'm saying creating partnerships with companies that have a bigger first party data and that share part of your customers and where you can create value with. So essentially my answer is like depends on frequency, and I think first party data is not always the answer.
Thank you, Lubomira. Absolutely, we couldn't agree more. And the good news is the audience actually chose to talk about data collaboration. But first, and we respect the votes here, we have a willingness to hear you about gamification, which actually is not so far away from augmented reality, which you just mentioned. So we will jump to the section on gamification, Anya.
Absolutely. Thank you, Thibaut. So gamification, it's been a fast-growing trend amongst brands as a way to engage their customers differently and deepen their relationship with them. And one example that we wanted to look at today is a brand that's been doing a really excellent job at riding this wave, and it's Burger King. So here we've got two recent examples of how the brand created strong engagement with its consumers through game mechanisms. The first one that I'll go over first, it requires potentially some more context for some of you who aren't as familiar with soccer or video games, so I'll backtrack a bit. But basically, as a brand, you can sponsor a soccer team and have your logo appear on their shirt in real life. The team shirt then appear in the soccer video game called FIFA. It's really popular, where gamers can build their own team and recruit players. Now, as you can imagine, the better the team, the more expensive the sponsorship is. So what Burger King did is they chose to sponsor a tiny, not really well-known team, Stevenage FC, and it's a fourth-tier English league team. And they got their logo on their shirts and then in the game. And this made the team really popular in the game, so popular actually that it became the most used team in career mode. And this way, Burger King got to put their logo on their shirts of some of the best players in the world and created a lot of fun-driven engagement with its users. A more recent example now, as you can see in the video on this slide, is the really recent campaign based around the French presidential elections, and parentheses, second round is this Sunday, don't forget to vote, for which they let users vote to elect a burger president and offered discounts on all the burger candidates, and this created a lot of engagement. So obviously, gamification is a trend that's working really well for Burger King, but the question we wanted to ask you is, do you think that this can be relevant for all brands?
Depends on how you define gamification, I would say. I would say that if you take a step back and if you unbundle what gamification means, I think, put the user into a landscape with actions to be done and model behaviors. And I think that if that's the case, it's interesting to see how model behaviors by creating incentives, by creating reputation effects. I mean, if you think of game, that's exactly what it is. Creates options, creates competition, creates ways of accessing exclusive things like life points, and all of that creates this craving for you to come back and back and back and play. And again, the reason why I'm breaking it down that way, which is a different, example that versus what you just said, Anya, is because it comes back to frequency. So you will think I'm obsessed about frequency, but I am obsessed about frequency. And I think that the way we should think of loyalty programs, CRM programs, subscription services is really around how can we use behavioral understanding of what drives our customers' behavior to model the outcomes we are expecting from them. So if the outcomes we're expecting from them is about growth, it will be a different strategy. If it's frequency, it will be a different strategy, etc. Just to give you a concrete example, and I think that's something I've been passionate in. I don't know where the L'Oréal team stand right now, but it's really around, okay, you have Modiface. Let's take skincare. Skincare is a great category. It's a category where your frequency would be medium. I would say medium range. It's not something you buy every day, but it's something that you may buy 5-6 times a year, 3 to 6. And so how can we make that category more sticky in people's lives, right? So you can start with this idea of creating a diagnostic about your skin, right? So this is what the wonderful Modiface and services team at L'Oréal did, using AR and AI, and that allow you to really have a diagnostic from your phone, which is a great experience in itself. And then the question is, when you have the diagnostic, what's happening? Okay, you're fine, you're happy, so you can have product recommendation. Fine. Once you have a product recommendation, how do you engage that customer into a regular interaction with your brand? And so think of beauty as you would think of fitness. Fitness is creating a habit. How do you create habits in your category, and how you drive through gamification or through behavioral models? How do you drive recurring? How do you drive frequency? How do you drive this coming back? And so, for example, if you take skincare, I mean, all over the place, and it's now really becoming a trend. This is something we foresaw like in 1920. Everywhere you start to have subscription-based models. Subscription is a big thing. Everywhere you start to have yoga, skin yoga. It's interesting because skin yoga is something you can do every day. You don't buy your beauty product every day, but skin yoga is something that, if you think with the parallel with fitness, is something you do every day. So how do you create this nice program? So programmatic, how do you create a programmatic approach more than a gamification? How do you create a programmatic approach to your category, whereas you will drive people to come back and back and back, and then being able to have their attention, which is the most precious thing we can we can wish for, and start this, personalized relationship with them.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you so much for untangling the different aspects of the question, Lubomira. I think you went way further than what we had expected as far as an answer to this question. So we now have, actually, you must know that the votes are very tight. I hope the presidential votes in France will be not that tight, but it is crazy. So it looks like our topic that you wanted to talk about, data collaboration, has now been surpassed by ecom. So let's go to ecom, if you don't mind, Lubomira. But I have hope still that we can at some point talk about this. So Anya, let's talk about ecom.
Thank you. So obviously, speaking about e-com, the COVID-19 crisis has created a huge boost for e-commerce. Just as an example, if you remember, at the very beginning of the crisis, US e-commerce penetration grew as much in just 8 weeks as it had over the course of the previous 10 years. So brands have had to obviously adapt to this new paradigm, and some of them were better positioned than others to do so, but we've seen really interesting strategies emerge in order to react to this trend. So here, quickly, we have 2 examples that we're going to look at, and the first one is Nike. And their main strategy to respond has been to really emphasize their direct-to-consumer efforts. They actually cut out their deals with a lot of the retailers that they used to partner with, meaning they actually pulled their products off the shelves of these stores, and instead they focused their efforts on their own e-commerce platforms, which led to strong, sustained growth in the share of their direct-to-consumer sales. Now, Chipotle, on the other hand, as a restaurant chain, was obviously in a very different position from Nike when the crisis hit, and was facing a really tough situation with the different lockdowns going on. So its response was to really double down on their digital ecosystem, focusing on having a really efficient and user-friendly ordering and delivery system, which, as you can see, in a really impressive manner, allowed them to continue to grow their revenue in 2020 and 2021, which for the struggling restaurant industry was really impressive. So these are just two examples, but what we wanted to discuss with you is how do you think that brands can adapt to this rise of e-commerce more globally?
Well, that's a very big question. It depends. No, I'm kidding. And next time I will give you more information on. I would have loved you to pick not Chipotle but Panera, because Panera is is in our portfolio of brands, and Panera brand is really interesting, and they did exactly the same thing, which is and I can really talk about this QSR trend, quick service restaurant, because it has been, it was life or death, when basically the store closed, it was life or death. So all the QSR industry had to reinvent itself around new delivery options, click and collect, pick up, of course, third-party aggregators such as the Deliveroo, the Justice, and all the others. So back to your question, how can brands adapt to the rise of e-commerce? Number one is to start from your business, and not all strategies will be valid in all sectors. If I take the L'Oréal example, and again, very humbly caveating that was the case one year ago, and of course not predicting anything around where L'Oréal is going. But L'Oréal example is an interesting one because you had 4 different channels. You had mass market with brands like L'Oréal, Garnier, Maybelline. You had luxury with brands like Lancôme and Biotherm and Yves Saint Laurent and Armani, etc., Kiehl's. And you had the 2 professional divisions, one that is mostly sold in pharmacies, La Roche-Posay, SkinCeuticals, etc., and one that was sold in hairdressers and salons, right? So very different typology of markets, which is interesting. Then we asked ourselves the question, should we have like one e-commerce strategy? And the answer was no. You have to really adapt, and especially the mix between D2C and ecosystem, like indirect and direct, depending on your business. And if you take very extreme examples, if you take Garnier or even L'Oréal Paris to a certain extent, who is distributed like everywhere in the world. Like you can find those products in every shop that have price points that are usually between 2 and like 30 euros for the most expensive. How can you make that business profitable, and what's the reason in D2C, and what's the reason for people to coming and buying on your website versus going on Walmart.com or Carrefour.com, right? Or Boots.com. Not that I'm living in the UK. So so you really have to start and think from first principles again. Number one, distribution. And this is where the Nike example is interesting, because everybody says, oh, Nike is fantastic. They went from 0 to like 50 or whatever % in their sales in D2C. But what people don't say, which you said, is that they cut like a big chunk of their distribution. It's very risky. It's very risky, right? So you have to make, so number one, start from your business, start from your distribution, start from your price point, and start from your level of iconicity of your brand, because people will search for your brands if your brand is iconic. At the other spectrum, you have a brand like SkinCeuticals in L'Oréal portfolio, right? A professional brand, amazing brand, dermatological brand. Little distribution, very little distribution. You cannot find that brand everywhere, right? And it's high price points, and it's an iconic brand for a certain niche, category of people who are completely aficionados of that brand. So this is typically building a much better case for D2C. And so the weight of D2C versus indirect would be completely different on mass market versus a professional division like a cosmetic active. So this is really where it's interesting. So number one, start from your business, distribution, iconicity, and price points. And number two, make sure that you face the consequences of your choices, which means that if you want to go D2C and if you are a traditionally distributed brand, you have to face what it means to cut like 25, 30, 40% of your business and to take the risk of transitioning your business online.
Thank you so much, Lubomira. We now have to jump to another session you referred to earlier, which is data collaboration. Finally, it was chosen. So I think, Anya, you have something very American to try to explain to us what really data collaboration is. So good luck.
Thank you. So, correct. To introduce this section, we thought we would start with a little metaphor. And for the part of our audience who hasn't yet had the joy of encountering the wonderful thing that you see on your screens right now, let me introduce you to the beautiful world of s'mores. S'mores have a pretty simple recipe. They're composed of honey crackers, chocolate, and a marshmallow. Now, taken separately, these ingredients are all somewhat interesting and they can be good, enjoyed on their own. However, it's really bringing them all together as one that creates the true magic of s'mores. And at this point, some of you might know where I'm going with this, but s'mores are a pretty good analogy for data because, indeed, taken separately, first party data, second party data, and third party data, they're interesting and you can do things with it, but it's really bringing them together and crossing them in a data collaboration way that brings your data dish to the next level. And now Thibaut is going to introduce you to a pretty yummy data recipe that we're currently working on with a client here in Kansas City.
Thank you and congrats, Anya. So the quick case I wanted to share with you is a case that is about to become a real reference case, best-in-class case in the field of data collaboration. It's the story of Hill's Pet Nutrition here in the US, which is obviously a pet food brand, very high-level brand. And they decided, they made this strange choice of moving into data collaboration. For that, they chose a clean room, a data clean room environment where they first put actually all their first party data. And the interesting thing is that when you have an environment for data collaboration, you start realizing that data collaboration really starts with collaborating with yourself, because brands have so much data, right? So many data sets. And there is still today, as of 2022, so much value to get from combining the different data sets that a brand owns or could own. And after doing that, obviously they started adding some other clean rooms with different partners in order to really build collaboration with external partners. They did that with retailers, and you know, amazingly enough, they could attract in their privacy-safe, identity-based clean room environment developed by LiveRamp. They could attract some retailers, and so pet food specialized retailers, which allows for unprecedented really types of collaboration between a pet food brand and a specialty retailer. And same thing with TV data. And if you start combining TV or media data with retailers data and with a strong, connected and well organized first party, you start having something like really looks like the dream of what brands could have as far as digital 20 years ago, I think. So long story short, Lubomira, we wanted to ask you your view on data collaboration, and please continue what you said earlier on frequency brands and love or non-love brands when sometimes first party is more complicated.
Yep. No, I think that's the number one thing I want to say is, d'abord, first, data collaboration is not a new thing. I mean, like American Airlines and Citi have been collaborating for 30 years, right? Airlines and credit cards. I mean, we have a lot of examples of that. So I think it's reassuring to see that it's not something that we are all making up, right? So it's something that has been existing. The difference, second example, I mean, for years and years, and we'll still do it, a lot of brands have been uploading their first-party data into the walled gardens ecosystem and having done retargeting and lookalike. I mean, this is completely not new, right? The thing that is new is probably the way we can do it, and probably also all the constraints that come with it, especially in the highly regulated environment that are in Europe or California and more and more of countries, to be honest. So I think that's point number one. So I see a huge potential for sure. The number two is I think again, first principles, you have to ask yourself why you want to do data collaboration, and not just because everybody says, or every consultant or every vendor says that you have to do that. And I think if you think about it, at the end of the day, it starts with simple things. What do you want to achieve? Number one thing is you may want to achieve customer insights, especially if your first-party data base is small for all the reasons we could think of, like not everyone is Facebook, right? Or Google or Amazon. So customer insight is a big thing. So how can you share data with others in order to better understand your customer behaviors? That's hugely important, because that's also what's gonna drive your NPD, your new product development cycle. So that's one use case. Number two is getting leads. If you think of for example, we are operating right now in JB. We are building a big pet insurance business. If you had asked me if I would be one day in pet insurance business, I would have said, why not? And why not? So here we are. We are building a pet insurance business. And that's very interesting, pet insurance business, because you have to think of who's gonna influence me as a proud pet parent. Who would influence me to take a pet insurance? You have my friends and influencers, like on social media, and pets are really talked about on the internet. Then you have very clear channels, which are the vets, which are the breeders, the one you will be buying the pets from, and the shelters, where you have lots of pets that are waiting very nicely and puppies to be adopted. And so when you start to map your thing, you're like, okay, it's interesting because I really want to get to share data with those guys so that we can, share leads, for example. So, and why is that important? Because it grows your business, all right? Growth and leads. That's a very good reason for you to create data collaboration with your upstream influencer or prescribers. That's one big use case. Another one could be understand your ROI and measurement, especially in the cookieless, whatever, third-party deprecation, It's becoming more and more complicated to really get a view of ROI and where it's going and what is actually your investment is doing. So this is where it makes total sense with your downstream environment, and especially the channels where you sell, to create those data collaboration platforms where you can exchange and get smarter in terms of understanding your performance. Then you can think of another one, and then we can go forever. But I'm trying to find the big ones. Expanding relationships, and that is typically the case of the lookalikes. And this is where, second-party data or third-party data and I hate first-party, second-party, and third-party, and especially the zero-party, which is even more confusing. But let's adopt the classification that we are all using. Second and third-party data, you can definitely use your data to create more meaningful segments and to expand your reach. Back to the question, which I see on the slide, targeting versus reach, where you can expand your relationship and really create value. So again, start from your business, start from what you want to achieve. Don't build platform for the sake of building platforms. Clean room is not the answer to collaboration. I mean, clean room is an enabling tool, which makes sense. But the reason is, why do you want to do that? For customer insights, for lead generation, for ROI and measurement, or for expanding relationships. I'm sure you have many other use cases in mind, but those are the ones I've been most frequently faced with.
Thank you so much, Lubo. We now have to move forward to probably the last of the questions last question among those we prepared, which is targeting versus reach. It is fair to talk about it because our audience really wanted also to address this, and then we will move on with some questions in the chat. So targeting versus reach. We wanted to remember everyone with this interesting quote we had a few months ago with Domiti Doat, who was then a CDO of Danone. She also organized and participated into such a live session. She told us precision is expansion. Because you are precise, you reach now more qualified audience. So this paradox, to a certain extent, is maybe interesting. And we thought it would be great to have your take, Lubomira, on targeting versus reach. Do you see a way to find scale with targeting?
Of course. I mean, we can. Of course, this is the whole point of what we launched in 2015, I think, with my dear friend Axel Adida at L'Oréal at the time, which was precision advertising. And precision advertising is exactly about how can you start from a relatively small first-party base and scale it by still being super targeted through lookalikes. I mean, this is the definition of lookalikes, right? So you can start with a targeted audience and expand your reach through lookalikes. I think the biggest risk of that question is not around is it one or the other. You can definitely do both, but let's make sure that we know again why we are doing the things we are doing, which with age, I think it's the best advice I can give to anyone. Why are we doing the thing we are doing? When you are operating with brands like L'Oréal Paris, Garnier, which are massive billionaire brands, you really want to get reach because this is how you're gonna conquer the next billion customers, right? So it's fantastic to be reaching the Lululemon, living in Kensington High Street, loving to go to the church on Sunday type of thing, but maybe that's not exactly where you want to be, right? If you are skin surgical and you are really targeting a very specific, super skin engaged type of people, maybe having had procedures before, that makes sense. You don't want to reach me, you want to reach that person, right? So again, it starts with who you are and your business model and how you think about it. So that's number one thing. I would say that there is a risk here. And the number two thing I would say is your capacity to operate at scale. The problem is not scale, is your capacity to operate from a marketing operations point of view. I remember in 2015, it was early days, we were so all passionate, we still are, and we were like, oh, let's create 16 micro segments with 16 different USPs and 16 different images and 16 and at the end, it was not better than having like one big, reach focused campaign. So not only wasn't it not better in terms of ROI, but it was so much more complicated that it puts such a strain on all the ecosystem, from the agencies to the marketing team to everyone.
Yeah.
That you're like, am I really wanting to do that in terms of like the cost, the incremental, benefit that comes with a very strong internal organizational complexity and operational complexity. So I think we should balance that also when you think of
Yeah. Definitely, and this is very interesting that you touch on organizational complexity cost as well, because I think much too often we kind of forget this cost, which can be huge, of course.
Yeah.
And thank you so much for all these insights, Lubomira. We could listen to you for hours and hours, but I'm afraid we have to move forward with some questions from the audience that we got in the chat, and we got so many of them. So thank you all, and apologies if we can't answer them all. So to start with, maybe we could take one that we have, which was something which had a lot of votes. So I guess the audience really wanted you to try to answer this one. Do you believe, Lubomira, that digital is suited to market luxury brands such as Hermes or Rolex? And what are the table stakes to market such brands in digital?
It's a good question. It's a question I think I've had since 1999. No, I'm kidding, but it's of course a big question. I think if you look at China, I think the answer is obvious. And of course, one can object that the usage in China are different, that people are much more used to use smartphones. Well, I think it's something that everybody's used now. I would say we can debate forever in terms of what means the distinction and exclusivity and rarity and scarcity that comes with the luxury environment, and what it means to be operating in digital, which in the mind of people is associated with mass and reach and all of that. So that's a philosophical debate, which is super interesting, and I think both strategies are eminently respectable. The key question is about discoverability. If you think of new generations, and if you think of the way they discover brands and they like brands, if you're completely absent from the digital world, you miss on them. And there is something around transmission, La Petite Robe Noire de Chanel, if you think of transmission, a lot of jewelry, watches, those are businesses that really are based on transmission. Today, what we see from a sociological and cultural point of view is that transmission is broken. It's broken. You see people from younger generation that want to do everything but the way their parents did. And so this whole thing around I'm inscribing, it's a bit sociology what I'm talking about, but this whole thing around me, I want to inscribe myself into the path of, all my ancestors, is not as present as it used to be. And people are really trying to create their own identity, and they create their own identity by choosing and melting and things that they see mostly online, to be honest. So I would think of it as, how do you want your brands to be discovered in the future? And counting only on the fame of brands and on the transmission mechanism that exists, because it's all about that distinction de Pierre Bourdieu, for those who know that. It's not enough, I think, today.
Wonderful. Thank you, Lubomira. Another question we got was someone who says choosing a tool, marketing automation tool, is not a strategy aligned, but equipping relevant teams with the adequate tech stack remains important. How do you manage IT enablement?
So we could speak about 2 hours just on this question. That's not fair, guys. Simplicity. So if I take a bit of perspective, I would say that there are 2 important things. Number 1 is to make sure that you build the stuff, like the platforms, at the right level, and not having the reflex of globalizing everything. I think that's a big risk. That's a big risk, especially when you have CDOs who are global CDOs. The first reaction is that I want to build my empire. This is very natural. This is very okay. This is very cool. But sometimes it's absolutely the wrong answer. So for example, if we take CRM, we decided at L'Oréal, that was a decision we took early on in the journey, we decided that CRM will not be built globally because the use case of global shopper was very tiny in our use cases. So we built the CRM platforms as close as possible to the field. So that's country, and then it's regional and da da da. So that's number 1 thing. And number 2 is people are it's so much new things, so much new acronyms, so much new da da da, that people often confuse being trendy with being operational and efficient. And I think the single most important thing you can think of, especially if you're not a tech company, which the majority of our audience is not, because they wouldn't be interested in digital transformation, is really around choosing a stack that you're able to operate with the people you have. Because at the end of the day, you can build fantastically complicated, best of breed, whatever thing. If you don't have enough people, if you don't have skilled people, and they are very rare and they are very expensive and it's very complicated to get them. If you don't have the operations that are following that, better go for very simple things. And just to give you the example, when we went on the whole media stack decisions in L'Oréal, we decided in 2016 to not have a DMP. And that was, everybody was having a DMP, and everybody was saying that that was the future of everything. Like it was even, doing the dishwashing thing at the end of the day, if you listen. So we chose to not have a DMP and to operate wall garden by wall garden, because that's the thing we knew we could do. And of course you miss on certain things, of course you do. But the incremental value you get by having a fantastic Ferrari, but with people who don't have their driving license, versus having a fantastic, normal car. I don't have my driving license, so I'm very bad at cars. A normal car is sometimes so tiny that go from the normal car with people who know how to operate it.
That was great. Thank you, Lubomira, so much. We have tons of questions, but I'm afraid I don't want to put anyone late here. Thank you tremendously. That was an incredible high-level discussion. We talked about everything from skin yoga to pet insurance and Pierre Bourdieu. So I'm not surprised, but thank you so much, Lubomira, for taking the time with us. I hope the audience liked it. I'm sure they did. And I want to just remind everyone that we're going to have another great one, but good luck to Luc Julia, who's coming next. Luc Julia, you might know, is the person coming from Aveyron. That's an important factor, but he also invented Siri. And even though he invented Siri, he believes that AI doesn't exist. So please come join us on May 17 at 5 p.m. Central European Time. And Lubomira, thank you so much.
Thank you, Thibaut and team, and thank you to the audience, and have a fantastic end of the day.
Thank you.
Bye.
See you soon.
Thank you so
Bye-bye.
much, Lubomira.
Thank you,
Thank you very
everyone.
much.